Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Think Net Zero, where we explore the intersection of science, innovation, and finance in the global race to decarbonize. I'm your host, Dr. Ranchika Vijayasurigunatha from the University of Sydney's NetZero Institute. In this series, we are looking at how climate finance can become a strategic tool, not just a source of funding, to accelerate innovation and deliver real-world solutions for a sustainable future. In our last episode, we introduced the NetZero Institute, its vision, its research focus, and its role as a bridge between knowledge and industry. Today, we take the next step, how innovators and researchers can attract climate finance to scale their technologies. To help unpack this, I'm joined by someone who's been leading this transformation, Professor Deanna D'Alassandro. She's the director of the NetZero Institute and the advisor of DAC Labs, a research and innovation hub launched in 2004 to accelerate carbon capture technologies and other low-emission solutions. Professor Deanna, welcome to Think Net Zero. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Neera, and it's wonderful to be here. And these are incredibly confronting, but also incredibly exciting times for climate innovation. And I'm really delighted to be a part of this conversation.
So we'll be spending the next 30 minutes exploring what it takes to move a great climate technology from the lab into the market, and how financial innovations plays just as important a role as a scientific innovation. We'll cover the current climate tech landscape, explore funding pathways, talk about how research institutions can bridge this gap, and share some practical insights for innovators and investors alike. So let's dive in. All right, Deanna. So let's start with the big picture view. As the climate tech sector seems to be expanding at an extraordinary pace, what are you seeing as the key areas of growth and innovation in this sector right now?
So, look, it is extraordinary. And if you look at the last 3 years, we've seen a significant surge in investment, talent, and energy directed towards climate technologies. You mentioned the area that I work in, which is called direct air capture, all the way through to technologies like energy storage, green hydrogen, low carbon cement, carbon negative materials and renewable fuels. So there really is this entire wave of innovation happening around what we call the hard to abate sectors. So these are industries that are really essential to our modern day lives, but they're very difficult to decarbonize. And some of these that of course would probably be top of mind are things like steel making, aviation, shipping and heavy manufacturing. And you could even include the health sector as a very hard to abate sector. But you mentioned DAC Labs, which is one of the startups that spun out of the lab. And what we're doing there is we're working on new materials for direct air capture that could dramatically reduce the energy required to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And of course, that's just one piece of what is a much, much larger puzzle that includes renewable energy, carbon use and storage.
And it sounds like science itself is moving quickly, but the challenge is getting these solutions out of the lab into the large-scale implementation.
Yeah, that's right, Neera. So the scientific community, of course, is producing breakthroughs fast, but taking those discoveries from the lab bench to market is where things often slow down. And so a prototype may work beautifully at small scale, at the lab bench scale, but scaling it up, building a pilot plant, testing reliability, proving economic feasibility, that's where really significant funding and long-term commitment are needed. And of course, many people underestimate that particular step. It's not enough just to have that strong scientific result, but you really need that whole ecosystem, the engineering, the policy understanding, and of course the capital to make it happen. And often that capital has to come from a mix of public and private sources.
That's a great point. So we often think of innovation as a scientific journey, but it's also a financial one. The innovation ecosystem depends on investors who understand both risk and impact.
Yeah, and we're definitely starting to see more of that. Investors who understand that addressing climate change isn't just a moral imperative, it is a massive economic opportunity. And many would probably be aware of this figure that came from McKinsey that estimated that achieving net zero will require $9 trillion per year in investment by 2050. And of course, that's not just spending. its value creation in clean industries. But really, for that to be recognised and realised, then the early research, the ideas being developed inside our universities and startups need financial pathways to grow, and that's where climate finance comes in.
So let's get into those financial pathways a little bit. When we talk about climate finance, it's often seen as something abstract or policy-driven. But for innovators, it's a very tangible. It determines whether the ideas see the light of the day. So what are the main funding avenues available for climate innovators today?
So there are a number of different options and pathways. This is really quite a big and broad ecosystem, and understanding, of course, how to navigate it is key. But I think there are a few main categories that we can break this down into. So the first one, and I'd say the one that many of our researchers access first and foremost, is government grants and subsidies. So these are really important for early stage research, the feasibility studies and pilot scale projects. They're not expected to generate returns, but rather to really de-risk innovation such that private capital can flow in. So second, what we see then is venture capital and private equity. And these players come in when there's a viable prototype and a path to commercialisation. So they're looking for scale, impact, and of course, long-term returns. Then we have corporate partnerships, and we're seeing more and more of sort of companies and businesses co-investing with startups or research labs. For example, a cement company investing in low carbon materials, or an energy firm partnering with hydrogen researchers. And finally, and you sort of touched on blended finance already, this is this interesting area which is really at the intersection of a number of other areas, impact investment or blended finance. And these models are ones that combine public, private and philanthropic funding. And the key here, I think, is that they can share the risks and the rewards. And so they're especially powerful for technologies that are promising but not yet fully proven in the market.
That's a great, clear framework. And what do investors look for when they're evaluating a potential climate technology? So this is a question we all ask.
It is, and it's quite interesting because in my email this morning, there was in fact somebody who'd reached out to me with almost exactly this type of question, is what do I look for? They're trying to evaluate and de-risk a particular opportunity that has become available to them. So they're looking for a combination of technical credibility, scalability, and alignment with market or policy signals. So often we talk about the mission of research having to match the market. So they'll ask things like, can this technology operate at industrial scale? Is the cost trajectory realistic? And does it fit with emerging regulations or incentives? And for instance, a technology that supports Australia's safeguard mechanism or the EU's carbon border adjustment could be more attractive because it's already aligned with major policy frameworks.
That's really insightful. It's not just about the science, is it? So it's about showing how your innovation fits into a broad economic or regulatory context.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe I can give the example of the DAC Labs, our spin out. So one of our projects focuses here on a carbon capture material that initially seemed too niche for investors. But when we framed it as part of a whole carbon removal value chain, showing its role in a much bigger and broader ecosystem that could integrate with carbon markets, it suddenly made financial sense. And that project went on to secure early stage blended finance from a consortium of public and private backers.
That's a fantastic example. And it shows that success isn't just about having the best technology, but about understanding your value in the system.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something that every innovator needs to grasp. Investors aren't only funding an invention, they're funding the pathway to deployment.
And that's where I imagine the storytelling becomes quite powerful.
Definitely. It really is that ability to communicate your impact clearly, confidently, and in measurable terms. And this is one of the strongest assets that an innovator can have. And you need to be able to articulate not just what your technology does, but why it matters. So what emissions can be cut, what markets can it open, and what risks can it help mitigate? And when an innovator can tell that story grounded in data, but also vision, investors listen.
That's a great way to synthesize your storytelling. And so let's talk about the role of institutions like the NetZero Institute. Universities traditionally have been research powerhouses, but increasingly with this new kind of a market emerging, they're becoming hubs for innovation, commercialization, and partnerships. So how do institutes like NetZero Institute help bridge this gap between research and investment?
Yeah, so at the NetZero Institute, we see ourselves both as a platform for bringing people together, but also a connector to build bridges between people who often have never met before, although often share a mission. So we bring together the research community, government, and the private sector to create opportunities for climate innovation to scale. And so I often really frame our role in three key areas. The first is around infrastructure. So we help in connecting people with the labs and with the test beds and expertise needed to move from concept to prototype. And that includes test beds that can be in other countries. So we can actually access our collaborators overseas and help to connect our people to those laboratories to help accelerate the implementation of the work they're doing. It's around capability building. So we help to put together teams and help them connect with mentors on market readiness, intellectual property, and financing strategy. And of course, not to be underestimated, the importance of networking. So connecting researchers with investors, corporates, and policy partners who can help them take that innovation to the next stage. And so the example I gave of DAC labs, it's a personal example, but it really started from our university lab, and it's evolved now into this incubator that works across disciplines, so material science and engineering, finance, and there is a really important policy angle there as well. So we help researchers not only innovate but commercialise responsibly at the institute.
So universities like ours are acting as incubators for this new net zero economy.
Yeah, and we should say we're not alone here. Across the world, research institutions are taking a more proactive role. They're spinning out startups, co-funding pilot plants, and of course, embedding students and researchers directly into industrial projects. This model doesn't just accelerate innovation, it creates a new generation of scientists who are also entrepreneurs and who understand that along with the science needs to come the strategy.
For innovators and researchers who might be listening right now, what practical advice would you give them for attracting climate finance specifically?
Yeah, so I think there's probably a handful of key things that can be helpful. We've already touched on the importance of storytelling, so building a strong narrative. Investors invest in stories as much as spreadsheets. It's important to make your technology's purpose clear. So the why is very important. Who benefits? What problem is it solving? And how does it fit into the broader net zero agenda? The second I'd say is validating the data. Robust, transparent results give investors confidence. If you can show independent testing or publish in credible journals, then that will go a long way. The third I'd say is tailoring your approach. So understanding what kind of investor you're speaking to, whether it's government, venture capital, impact fund, or corporate, and tailoring the pitch to their priorities. So think about your audience. Fourth is early collaboration. So building partnerships with universities, accelerators, and industry. And these connections are really important for signalling credibility and helping to de-risk the proposal. And finally, I'd say, and we've touched on this already, but the alignment with policy framework. So investors are looking for signals that the work is supported by strong regulation or incentives. And this is important because it reduces risk and increases the chance of long-term viability.
That's such a sound advice. And it really underscores that innovation is a collaborative effort and it takes a network of support, not just a single idea.
Yeah, I think we all know that no one achieves net zero in isolation. It requires an ecosystem approach that is really going to connect talent to knowledge and finance in meaningful ways.
So before we close, let's look ahead. What trends do you see shaping climate innovation and finance over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think there are a few key trends that stand out. The first is really around this blended finance. So collaborations between governments, banks and philanthropic organisations, which are important to share the risk and crowd in the private capital. The second is that there will be growing emphasis on measurable impact. So investors want to see real carbon reductions. They also want to see biodiversity benefits and social outcomes. And third, there's regional diversification. So innovation and finance will no longer be concentrated in a few global hubs. We're going to see much more happening in emerging markets and regional Australia where there are new industries growing.
So that's such an inspiring vision. So thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your deep insight on how innovation and finance can come together to accelerate the net zero transition.
Thanks, Nira. It's been a real pleasure to share this space and to highlight what are really critical links between research, innovation and investment. Thank you.
Thank you.